What would all of you way back there like to talk about? I've been thinking about this since I've been thinking maybe we should take one row of cushions on the side and put another row of chairs along there and then put some, just so.
There's so many of us.
Yes. Yeah. I need my opera glasses. One thing, just to start out, of this very concise note from Kathleen Benz, who is one of the people on 3-year retreat, and their retreat is winding up sometime in June, and this letter is to you, since it says, Dear KCC Sangha. So I just wanted to share this, a reminder of the people there. She says, thank you for your support of the 3-year retreat. Those of us in retreat feel it in many different ways. I have photos of many of you, and sometimes I go through them, pausing at each one and thinking about you, wishing you well. Thinking, too, of those I do not have photos of, and those I have not yet met. It supports me to know that you are out there holding down the fort, practicing in whatever ways you are able. Thank you so much for being a part of my journey as I am part of yours. In the Dharma, Kathleen. So, just wanted to share that. And,
that's wonderful.
Yeah. There are a lot of people here who probably didn't meet Kathleen. Yeah.
It's been that long.
Yeah, it's been that long. Yeah. There's also a note from Hannah, who's one of Kathleen's compatriots out there. It's in the back, a little longer. All right. What's the question that you'll wish you asked that comes to your mind about 20 minutes after you leave? I always wish I knew what question that was myself.
I can start us off. I've been observing that I have a lot of, in the terms of attraction and aversion, I have a lot of feelings of personal dislike arising, I think. And I know part of it is, just living in the political climate that we're in, and I will either hear of some atrocity and this will come up, I will feel this aversion, which is really, personal dislike for individuals, or it'll be someone, in my life that I'm interacting with in person along the same similar lines. And I am wondering if you could say a little bit about that experience of observing when attraction and aversion rise and fall, and the practice of compassion alongside that. Is it best to endeavor to try to not ever personally dislike anyone, and to try to, use the practice of compassion as an antidote to try to never personally dislike someone, or is it more a matter of practicing compassion even as we observe that type of a aversion rise and fall.
Which do you think is practical?
Practical. That's a really good question. I'm not sure if practical and aspirational, what I would aspire to is necessarily the same. I would like to hope maybe they could be, but it seems very daunting. I can't imagine being at the place yet where the dislike won't arise. It just hits me like a wave sometimes. It just fires up, and there I am, and I feel like I'm seething with dislike. I think I can, in practical terms, try to cultivate compassion, even though I'm experiencing that.
In the midst of it.
Yeah.
So between the two options that you set out, that one's more practical. Yeah. That would be my general recommendation in whatever situation, is that you do what's practical, because what's practical will allow you to do something, as opposed to feel like you've always failed and never really quite done anything. That would be my sense of it. I don't think it's possible to actually it's theoretically possible to cultivate such strong karmic tendencies that dislike never arises in your stream of being. That's theoretically possible. I've not witnessed that in my own stream of being, nothing close to that. So the practical option, so like doing what we can, allows for some success, even in brief moments. But to have that sense of success as opposed to a sense of never really getting it is, I think, then there's at least some proof of concept. So you can do something. I think they're embedded in your question is something that I'm trying to say it in a way that this isn't actually that complicated. It's more a matter of my own mind trying to look for something here. The search for the right way to do things and the connotations about the right way to do things is, I think, that's a very strong impulse culturally. And there's something trying to tease apart the sense of what a deep aspiration looks like versus doing something the right way. So, because if we're caught up in the notion of doing something the right way, usually we're not, the practical impact of it is not in the forefront. It's getting it right. It's almost like, is there some way I can do this so I'm off the hook? If I'm doing it, if Bill said I'm doing it the right way, then, okay, checkbox. And it's actually more complicated than that. And actually doing something so that we're actually engaged and in the and really at the kind of the rough and tumble of working with what comes up in our own minds. That's doesn't necessarily look like it all works out tidy. It's not a tidy business. So being able to do something practical is important.
I can't help think that the fact that I'm spending, I think, more and more time kind of caught up in the suffering of all this active dislike is probably not a good sign that, that I'm making progress on my path to what I aspire to. So, trying to figure out, I think practical terms to try to figure out ways to work on that is helpful.
Yeah. And one thing that's important is to do something, whether it's exactly, I wouldn't necessarily say it has to be on the cushion, but it has to be independent of reading the news, reading the triggering news, to actually take some time apart from that to cultivate some kind of intention, some kind of analysis of what's actually really going to be helpful in the long run. So that then when you dive into the process of informing yourself about what's going on, there's something in the back of your mind besides kind of a general kind of a Hail Mary hope that it kind of goes well. So if you really take, it's actually necessary to go to the lab somehow and check what happened yesterday. Check what happened when I read the news this morning. Check what happened. How helpful was it? How helpful was the pattern of reaction? How much did I actually learn that helped me discern something? And how much did I just indulge in my own sense of self-righteousness?
Yeah, I think that part of what I'm trying to look at is how much of it is me, how much of it is where I'm at, and then how much of it a dear friend of mine this weekend said, we were talking about depression overall in this big discussion about depression, and she said, I think a lot of us, progressive liberal folks are just depressed right now. and so part of it is I'm thinking, that these are troubled days in the lab,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or at least I think maybe they are. So part of it is how well I'm doing or what I'm doing. And part of it I think maybe is, I'm struggling during what seemed to be anyway, comparatively very troubled days in the lab, at least in my time in the lab.
Yeah.
Well, this may be similar to what you were saying. I was between the things you were talking about, it seemed to me that, let's say, working with developing compassion for individuals would necessarily be doing that probably on the cushion or anyway, sitting quietly trying to do that. And that really, that really would leave, that will leave an imprint. And just the fact that you spend time with your mind engaged in that way is helpful and will have, and if you're actually working with the, individuals that you find you dislike, but if you find ways to cultivate compassion for them, the next encounter would be changed by that, I think. And so it seems like that opens up the possibility for a change in that, instantaneous reaction to the person or persons that you don't like. And part of that reflection, can certainly be the separation of the person from the actions and things that they're doing that you dislike, and to see that it isn't the person that you is bad, or it's the things that they're doing that you probably genuinely dislike. And I think that is a helpful thing to tease apart.
Thanks. I think that's it. I think I really need to work on that, because I think when there is something atrocious, I think that person is bad. I think my daily Tonglen practice, etc., helps. Definitely it helps, but I think I need to meditate on that concept, what you just said. That's helpful. Thanks.
This is good. I should request that we alternate sides of the room. So yes.
So I'm going to pick up where he left off, because there's a place where it cuts off in my head and I start going, I don't get it. Because I can give very specific political figures to try to, or whatever, and I do try to cultivate compassion, and then the acts are happening again and again. And I find myself going, as a parent, I always said it's the act and the misbehavior that was bad, not the child that was bad. And it's very easy to cultivate compassion for a child who's misbehaving if 99% of what you see of that child is, this wonderful human being or these wonderful human beings. But what's happening a lot for me is that I'm not seeing the wonderful child and I'm not seeing any of the wonderful child, and I'm having a hard time. I can still cultivate compassion, but at some point I want to, as a parent, discipline the child. And that's not possible, obviously, or I want to change something, and I start hitting my head on frustration. And I think last time I talked, I kind of fell into this a little bit, and I'm no longer experiencing rage. But it's still, there's a sense that somewhere between having this compassion for someone and the experience of what's actually going on to people that I do love and care about as a direct effect of what that person that I'm giving compassion to. There's something in the middle there that's just really messy and painful.
Yes.
And that wasn't a question, it was a statement, I guess. How do you reconcile that? How does one reconcile that?
Gradually. But I think it's possible to see that apart from our immediate family or immediate circumstances where we can either discipline a child or have some kind of corrective conversation where we can express what we need and get a relationship back on track in a mutually respectful way, that beyond those circumstances, the notion of adding something to the situation that's corrective is very indirect, and that's always part of the situation. So our impulse to place, bring the very large child, kind of shrink them down and bring them really close so that we can tell them to take a time out. We're applying a model that actually never has been. We never have had that opportunity. So the things that whatever influences that we can create that will provide a more positive container in the world need to happen in the creative ways that we can figure out to make them happen. So that's, and for many people, the shortcut, even with the child, is to smack them. So, and then we realize, well, that probably didn't produce long-term the effects of that I wanted. But still, we have that impulse with the large child. So then it's tricky. It is tricky. I think we actually had we've had a fairly long run in this country with relative stability compared to things that go on in other countries throughout history. Even I was reflecting on it this other day. It's like, wow, when I was a kid, there were only 48 stars on the flag, and now there are 50. And oh well, but that seems like that's the stable situation. But that sense of stability is actually very fragile, and it's kind of a veneer in any case. So I think there's something in us that rebels against having the stability taken away, and that's a very strong impulse in society in general. That I thought we had jobs for life in this industry. I thought we were all going to relate to each other in this way, and those odd people they'd never move in here, and they'd never marry my daughter, and my daughter would never marry that daughter, and all the kinds of things that, like, oh my word, stability is being ripped out from underneath me. But it's to have a bigger sense of how vast suffering is, I think it's very important. Then within that, we say, oh, here's another example. This is another example of the dynamics that cause harm and suffering. It's not like, well, everything was fine until so-and-so got on the scene. It wasn't. It wasn't. And so it's, and hoping that it will all get better if so-and-so just goes away. It's like, no. We might actually, we live kind of, this is one of the good examples why the teachings on the 6 realms, I think, are helpful to think about the range of existences, the range of kind of circumstances, and the range of relationship to circumstances that beings can have. From the God realm, where everything basically seems entirely controllable. It's all so under control that absolutely nothing is confronting in any way. Everything is a feedback loop that tells me, I'm perfect, I'm perfect, I'm perfect. The word for that realm, nagyal. It's like it literally in Tibetan is I king. I'm king. I run everything. Everything is under my control. And from that to the hell realm, where nothing, absolutely nothing can be controlled. The experience of existence is though it's entirely inimical, or whatever. I think I'm missing a syllable there. But it's your enemy. Everything about the environment and anything, it is actively your enemy, and nothing can be controlled. So just recalling that the range of experience that beings can have, it's this vast range, and none of it, even the God realm, even the I King business, is still stuck on circumstances. It's still stuck on that. So There's one of the problems, if we get, I think, too small in our compassion, then it's almost like, oh, well, I'm giving that person an excuse. And that one, it's actually not cool to excuse something. That's more about me getting it. Yeah, so what, do whatever. I don't actually have to feel anything. I don't have to think about things. I don't have to deal with all the really tough stuff that comes with it. That's more about me. So it's not easy, but it's emblematic of the relationship with samsaric circumstances. So it's work. And work is, we want to be paid for work. This one, we should get paid a lot to be dealing with this, I tell you. I don't know. That's as close to good news as I can come. When I think about circumstances, I don't know that much about it, but there was a period in Chinese history, the Warring States period, of 300 years of continual conflict and bloodshed. During that time, the population of China was reduced to 30% of what it was at the starting point. That's a period of 3 centuries. So then I think about that and I think, there are 2 things that come up. What do I have to do to contribute to things getting better as opposed to heading in that direction? That's one thing. And the other one is, actually, things aren't as bad as my hysterical self who wants it all to work out and everything go back to that stable God realm business. It's not as bad as that side of me thinks. But there are 2 pieces to that. But it's kind of sobering.
I've struggled with this in waves, but it seems to always come up as I get more into my practice and I'm meditating more and coming to more sessions and just kind of more involved. The issue of morality comes up a lot, but in a way where I feel like the more involved I get, and it has all the positive effects, but then I also become like, really, it's like my super ego becomes super activated and I'm super worried about morality and kind of getting it right.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of go into like super self-control mode. And I feel like this is the first time I'm able to put words to it, but I think that cycle like happens a lot.
Is there any, can you give any kind of concrete example, something that's not too challenging to talk about?
Yeah, just, I don't know, simple things like, oh, I shouldn't go out with friends and have a drink, or I shouldn't do this, and that might not have like a positive consequence, or might not be like the best way I could be spending my time. Or like, I shouldn't be like filling my schedule like this and being so busy, like I'm just trying to distract myself, or so it gets kind of like punitive.
Yeah. I'm thinking back to the first months that we came to, right a few months after we arrived in Portland. We came to Portland because KCC was here, Lama Tinley had just arrived, and a few months after that, His Holiness the 16th Karmapa came to Portland and was here, and along with him were some of the younger tulkus, and young Jamgung Kultro, who's since passed away very sadly in a car accident. but he was teaching, and he could speak English quite well, and but he was teaching in Tibetan with a translator. And somebody asked him a question that had some of this kind of flavor to it. And like, what should I do in this situation? Should I do this? And then I feel like I shouldn't do it. And then in English he said, and the question was about renunciation. And that was the term the person was using, because, well, renunciation, good thing, non-renunciation, bad thing. And Jamgon Control in English just said, very briefly said, that's not renunciation, that's repression. Because the renunciation comes out of some sense of a kind of a clarity, of a sense of that actually is not helpful. It's just kind of, it's not helpful. And it unfolds over time. So I think what you're expressing is some of the, when you start to look into things, well, how much time should I spend hanging out? How much time should I spend on this? But it's very easy also, I think, to crank up the dial, to want to get it right, as opposed to do something that's productive. Just then, well, this, at least the rest of me will be miserable, but at least this part of me will be certain about something. And it's like, but then that kind of that part that's feeling okay is kind of like this little time bomb that's going to go off and blow up the whole thing at some point. And then there's no thread of actual unfolding of renunciation over time. It's just like you blow up the whole thing and then have to go pick up the pieces or just give up on the whole project. So I think it's important to do what is practical, again, to go back to that theme. And if you actually want to spend some more time doing formal meditation and what you do is something else instead, then you actually have to look, and it's necessary to give up some things in order to spend the time doing what you want to do. But if you wind up feeling kind of miserable and never able to actually relax, then it's probably better to go out with your friends a little bit and just allow things, sit on the back porch and play your guitar and sing. Whatever it is that you do that you just kind of relax with. For people who really have a very strong aptitude for renunciation, that can really become a really deep path, then it's good to have a lot of support for that. And that's like a monastic vocation is a wonderful vocation, but it needs to actually come out of being able to really relate to the positive qualities of renunciation, that as a kind of a positive cultivation. And then with the support of a monastic community, then it's possible to go into that in a really good way. But it's not for everybody, and that's something. It's unfortunately I've seen too many people take that on as this is like the spiritual equivalent of extreme sports. So you're like, well, I'm going to become a nun or a monk. The nuns tend to be a little bit more successful than the monks, but unless the whole dynamic is really well ordered and sustained and well thought through, and there's enough support, it's very, very difficult to cultivate that path. But it's a good one. It's a very good one. So gradually, I think that's gradually and practically, and and you can continue conversations with whoever you feel close to talk about those kinds of things. Yeah, it's actually sad in the long run to watch people who are very enthusiastic about cultivating the path of renunciation, and then to see them kind of fall off that in ways that just doesn't feel good. You know, it's like, oh. I don't know if that answered your question.
I'll just add one sentence to
Okay.
that was a good response. And the other piece is that it's also true that if we encounter the Dharma and become more interested in it, if we don't change anything, it won't impact us. So the balance there is what we're looking for.
This afternoon's Q&A had a lot about suffering and the causes of suffering, and whether it's cultural or variations on that. And as I was hearing it, one of the internal answers that was surfacing in me was, well, cause of suffering, I usually come back to the big ignorance of not getting non-duality, and the various ways my ego gets in the way, as being underlying cause of a lot of suffering. And then you mentioned the ants. And now I'm getting back to this, then I got back into the realms, and the way I think of the 6 realms are, I'm a human experiencing them in their different aspects as they manifest with me being a human. And then coupling that with the ego or my ignorance of non-dual, being a cause of suffering, and then I was thrown for a loop. It's like, Yeah, so how does that fit with me as an animal or an ant suffering? Because I wouldn't think of animals as having ego. But then I'm probably just absolutely confused and conflating things. But
Yeah. We're very anthropocentric in our spiritual outlook, which is fine, and we need to kind of run with that and do what we can within our own range of experience. But thinking about the larger dynamic of suffering, when I soften from the identification of kinds of beings, and the ones that we know up close are us and the animals. That's it. But if I put the larger spread of experience that's reflected in the teachings on the six realms. For those who don't know, there's everything from where there's the hell realms, which is this realm of complete. Everything about it is your enemy. Nothing is under your control. The hungry ghosts, where there is this hint that something might be under your control, but it's pretty much everything that you get an opportunity to work with turns out to be not under your control. And then the animal realm, which is a realm where things are under somewhat, you can manipulate the environment to a certain extent, but it's basically a domain of the only recipe for success. The dress for success in the animal realm is just impulsive behavior. It's just programmed behavior. In the human realm, there's more. It's very similar, since we're just a form of animal, but there's a certain degree of discernment that's possible within that. And the jealous gods, you can almost see the situation of having everything under your control. And in the human realm, there's more. We're able to control situations a lot more creatively and more dynamically than animals. But if I draw it just in this dynamic of from absolutely no control and everything's your enemy to complete sense of control, it takes it actually out of the sense of, well, we're humans and they're animals, and we have egos and they don't have egos. It's a different frame of reference. So different types, you could say, different types of beings will manifest being stuck in samsara in different ways. And we manifest it in a certain way, and animals manifest it in another way. But our explanations about ego are actually quite anthropocentric. But the dynamic of being stuck in situations and not being able to see a way out, which includes this full range of experience, that's the frame of reference, and we're just one instance when we're in to use a kind of a technical term, programming term, where you put something there. That's one instance of this. So we use terms like non-dual and all this kind of thing as though they're two things that we're going to put back together or see that they never were two. And that can be helpful. All that study can be helpful, but I'm more drawn to actually being able to put my finger on how is confusion actually manifesting? What is the dynamic in the experience? And to go in through that, because in the unraveling of that confusion, whatever it is, we say non-dual, but whatever it is will unravel by itself.
Bill, if I was to back up and express it with something that fits closer, it would be that samsara and nirvana are the same, except for the way I look at it. Okay,
That's
I feel
pretty
like
classic.
I get.
That's pretty classic.
Yeah. Which is why I've always had trouble with the idea of disliking samsara. It's like samsara is nirvana. If I'm looking at it, unless I'm looking at it.
Samsara and Nirvana, Inseparable, is a fancy way of getting you to look at your experience directly, and not trying to replace your experience with something else as the basis for insight. It's not two things that are the same. So if you're going to say, oh, I shouldn't dislike samsara because samsara and nirvana are ultimately inseparable, then we're missing what the samsara piece is. We're missing, as Michael said, if it's broken, it's working. It's the brokenness that makes it samsara. It's the brokenness, and the brokenness is in our confusion. So if we objectify samsara and make it into some kind of condition or something like that, external to confusion, then what you said makes some kind of sense. But if we say, I'm going to like samsara because samsara and nirvana are the same, then we've missed something.
That's not, if that's what I said, that's not what I meant.
If that's what I heard, then
No.
then it's not what you meant.
No, it's
So,
not. What I meant was I never understood people who said, oh, enough with samsara or enough, because I didn't see the difference between samsara and nirvana.
You don't? You mean you're a Buddha?
But I'm not.
Okay. Then you see a difference between samsara and nirvana.
Here's where I feel stuck. Here's where I feel difficulty. It's what I can sense and what I can word get separated.
Mm-hmm.
But what I sense is, if I was trying to word it, they are the same, but they only look different because I was looking at it from here. And it's not, and that's even a bad analogy because I'm not there or here.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like it's just a trick of where I looked or how I looked. It's
Mm-hmm.
more like a fool the eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But
Then you have to hate samsara because samsara is looking at it from the wrong side. It's the looking in the wrong way that is samsara. It's not the thing that you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's these teachings should in the end give us some confidence to look more and more directly and more immediately into our experience as it arises, as opposed to thinking, which is the samsaric impulse, is this isn't it, something else must be it. This isn't it. We're not there yet. The samsara outlook is sitting in the back seat and saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And when the answer is very, very clear, just in the question, we're not. We're very certain we're not there yet. And that certainty we're not there yet leaves us in this lurch to grasp, to find something else to improve upon this profoundly subtle dissatisfaction that's embedded in the confusion. So being able to actually relax enough so that we turn our attention straight back into our experience is key. And in this, there's going back to kind of the very beginning of grasping after permanence, in the sense that we make a thing out of this kind of we sort of make a thing out of our dissatisfaction, which becomes a thing, and then we're launched. Then the speed of the mind takes over, and we're launched to look for something else, because we've made it kind of a very subtle thing out of dissatisfaction. So being able to relax enough so that actually we turn straight back into that dissatisfaction, the heart of the dissatisfaction, is a key thing. But my talk is cheap. And before I make it worse, we should dedicate whatever merit is left.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. One to say Giuseppe. What's that? What do you say?
Because I always want to say Giuseppe.
Yeah, Giuseppe. Yeah, that's good. Giuseppe is fine. I like it.